Thank you very much for coming today. You have to answer a question for me, though. In law school, everybody sits in the back bench. Here, everybody sits on this side of the room. Is this left versus right or something? Or am I missing something? Is that close to the door because we all have interviews to go to or something? Well, we'll get you out in time. That's one of the things we try to promise for you. We're delighted today, as opposed to a number of lawyers and others like me that you've heard speak before, we actually have somebody who's done it here with us today. Jack Abraham graduated from Wharton in 2008, founder and CEO of Milo.com, which was acquired by eBay, and you're now director of local for eBay marketplaces. Is that right?
Yes.
So, and I'll let you describe it a little more, but this is something that I think has been definitely needed. I mean, how do you combine the online ability to find stuff online with what's local and where can I actually find it to buy it? So this is fantastic. Jack has been named one of Inc.'s 30 Under 30, a list of the country's coolest young entrepreneurs. He's also selected by Business Week as one of their best young entrepreneurs, and also on Fast Company's list of 100 most creative people in business for 2010. If I can just do a couple of administrative things to remind you, Tutorial 11 is going to be the 28th of October, and it's going to be on brand building. We have a number of people from Smart Design to talk about building your brand, and we hope you join us. It's up here. Normally we rotate between here in Wilson Sonsini today, the next one on the 28th, and the one after that, which I think is November 18th, the Friday before Thanksgiving, will also be up here. That one will be on M&A. And can I move one forward? Just to remind you, previous tutorials are online at any of these URLs. Also, I think if you put in Wharton and Entrepreneurs into YouTube, you'll probably come up with some of them, and that'll lead you to the rest. We're also going to try something a little bit more formal than we have in the past. Hopefully one or two of my partners will be joining me, but we're going to try to move over to the Dean's Conference Room, and then for any of you who have questions on legal aspects of starting a business, or maybe something beyond that that the lawyers might know, we'll have a little bit more formal Q&A session for an hour after this. Don't feel that you have to stay, but if you do have any questions or anything like that, we're happy to talk to you then, and it's over in the Dean's Conference Room. And I think that's it, and I'll start talking, and we'll get to the interesting parts. So, Jack, thank you for coming to speak with us, and take it away.
Great. Thanks for having me. Really great to be here. I thought I'd spend today, I'm happy to talk about a little bit about my background and how I got to where I am, just for context. But I really wanted to focus on basically helping get those of us here who have wanted to start a business but are kind of on the edge and have been thinking about it for a while, to hopefully go over the edge and do it, and why that's a smart idea, and why sort of really focusing on your own idea and what you're thinking about right now barely matters, with a bunch of examples from some of the most successful companies that have been created in the past sort of decade. I found all of those examples really helpful for me, and hopefully they'll provide some color for you and also be interesting. So before I do that, I'll, because I know I'm going to forget this, give you guys another reason to start a company before the end of the year if you're thinking about it, which might actually lead you to the legal roundtable, which is there's a very unique opportunity right now that's going to expire at the end of 2011, where if you start a company and you invest in the stock of that company, and it's what's called a qualified small business, so low assets, hasn't been around for a long time, so basically a startup, you have the opportunity to, if you hold that stock for 5 years and then you sell it after 5 years, have 0% capital gains tax, which is crazy. After you sell and the government comes and takes away a good chunk of your proceeds, it's really painful. So it might be something smart to do proactively if you are really thinking about starting something. So just thought that would be good to get out there.
Legal advertising.
Yes, good legal advertisement. So let me give you a little bit about my background. So I guess 4 years ago, I was sitting in a classroom like this in an entrepreneurship class, sort of listening to the entrepreneurship lessons, and some were relevant, some were more relevant than others weren't super relevant. And I was there with a friend of mine, Zach Weinberg, and we just said, you know what, why don't we just try something? Let's just do this. Like, why are we in a classroom spending all of our time learning about it? Sometimes the best way to learn is through doing. Let's just go and try something. We both had the itch. We both wanted to do something. So, we had like pretty good ideas, I'd say, but nothing like knock your socks off at that point in time. So what we decided to do is we actually rented a, I don't know if I quite want to say rundown, but fairly rundown loft in the Northern Liberties in Philadelphia, and we just started hanging out there. We got some desks set up, we got some conference room space, and we literally had aero beds that we slept on every day for probably like a period of 2 months. We applied for the Wharton Venture Award, which gave us each about $10,000 to kind of play around with, so we didn't have to worry about money for the summer. And we started getting going, and I think what they were working on at the time, Nat and Zach, was a video advertising product for small businesses. So the idea was, YouTube's getting really big, like, man, if you're a small business, wouldn't you like to reach all these consumers that are watching all these videos online? Seems like a reasonable idea. They started going down that path and sort of found no way. Just no way that business is going to work. Too much cost in the equation and really hard to get the distribution you'd need. At the time when I started, we were thinking about doing a sort of mobile shopping application. So this was before the days of Red Laser and anything like that. I had this observation that, wow, these phones have cameras in them. What if you could take a picture of a product at a store, take a picture of a barcode, and get online prices for that product? Wouldn't that be really cool? Like, seems like a pretty neat idea. Might be worth developing. So anyway, we both sort of went down those parallel paths. I found that it was before the App Store days, but we could develop the technology, but getting people to download it, getting people to really use it, and then once they were using it, once you got someone in a store scanning a barcode, like figuring out how to make money off of that was pretty hard. Our initial thought was, they're in the store, they're going to buy, they buy online, we can get a piece of the transaction from when they go online to buy. And what we found was people actually totally forget about that, and they go straight to Amazon or to eBay, and doesn't really give you a chance to get credit for the transaction. So we were sort of both in this position at this time where we're like, oh man, we wanted to start these companies, this really isn't working out. But the great thing about it was we sort of got to know our relative spaces better. So for me, I got to know the shopping space a lot better, had been poking around there a lot. For them, they started really getting to know the advertising space. I remember this was right around the time the Facebook platform opened up, and I remember it being like 2 a.m. at this loft in the Northern Liberties. We're up whiteboarding ideas and trying to figure out what to do, and they had this great idea for this social targeting algorithm. Like, use the data of your friends on Facebook to target ads better to you. And literally the next day, we were on a plane to California to talk to people about it. It was just very kind of rapid pace, just trying to give you an idea of what this environment was like. So they started trying to do that. I started thinking about doing like a shopping website. Both of those didn't really end up working out super well. But again, we got a lot more knowledge about the spaces that we were in. And Nat and Zach said, you know what, like, display advertising seems really inefficient. It just seems like buying banner ads and them being untargeted and having to talk to all these publishers and do all this stuff, that's kind of outdated. At this point, by the way, they'd gotten far enough and I had too, where both of our companies had surrounded ourselves with other really smart people who knew these markets a lot better than we did. So they had the guy who founded Right Media, which is a huge display advertising company that Yahoo bought for $700 million or something like that. I had a lot of people from the comparison shopping space, including Farhad, who founded Shopzilla, Len Lodish, who's actually a Wharton professor, who invested in diapers.com early, and a bunch of other really successful companies. And we were both learning. We were sort of taking it in. And then we sort of split paths from there. I moved out to Silicon Valley with my co-founder, just decided all in, gonna go for this. We got an apartment off of University Avenue and just really started cranking on our ideas. And we really started getting close to what we felt like was a really big pain point, which is consistently across all of these applications that we were trying to build in the shopping space, we kept finding this problem that people were facing, which is, it's great to shop online, but sometimes I just want to get it locally. I just want to see the product, I want to touch it, I want to feel it. I might need it tonight for some reason. It's really hard to get products fast online. And we observed this behavior, which was a lot of people, and we'd literally bring people in, have them shop in front of their computers and observe sort of what was missing. And there were literally people who would look at websites of retailers and be like, oh man, that's a great product. Where can I buy this? Who has this product near me? How am I gonna figure that out? Am I gonna have to call every store nearby? Am I gonna have to drive to the store blindly and hope it's there? Or do I do the reverse, where I go to the store, I figure out what's there, then I research it, and then sort of triangulate and try to figure it out? So from our perspective, we said, wow, that's a pretty big problem to solve for consumers. It's consistent. We noticed a pattern. We did our research on the space, and it turned out that this was not something localized to the people that we were observing. This was a huge macro trend across the economy. So even today in 2011, there are 5% of the retail sales in the country are done online. 95% are still done locally. 95%. It's 20 times the volume. But what was really interesting that we found in our research was something at the time, 30 or 33, 35%, somewhere in that range of commerce was this behavior. People, they look online, but then they buy in the store. So we thought, aha, big market, big pain point for consumers. That seems like something really worth going after and building. And the biggest pain point, of course, was how do I solve this problem of, man, do I have to call every store? Am I gonna have to drive around town to find these products? How am I gonna do that? So that became our enemy, just like the telephone, the phone call, your ability to need to do the phone call. And we started thinking about what are things that we could do to eliminate your need to do that phone call. So we analyzed the situation. So what happens when you call to figure out if a product's in a store? You pick up the phone, you dial the number of your local Best Buy or wherever, another human being picks up the phone, asks you what you're looking for, and types it in a computer system. Why that happens? To me, that was just so weird that you needed humans when it's really, you could just have a computer talking to a computer to find this information. So we wanted basically to eliminate the humans from that situation and set out on a mission of bringing the world's offline inventory online, focusing on real-time inventory. So that same thing that the person's doing when you call them at the store, just hooking into that computer system and making it searchable, building a search engine where you could find these products, figure out who has what in stock, and find the best price too. So in addition to finding out who has it, oftentimes retailers will carry the same product. So giving you the ability to really make sure you're confident and you found the right price. So we sort of hit this idea and started running with it. We ended up raising money from some really amazing people in the Valley. This was actually 2008, right when the stock market started falling apart, which is a very fun time to be building a business. So I remember, like, just to give you an example, was introduced to this guy, Keith Rabois. I don't know how many people know who Keith is in the Valley. Probably people more in the Valley know Keith Rabois. So Keith was one of the early guys at PayPal. He was early at LinkedIn, one of the first investors in Yelp, one of the first investors in YouTube, early at Slide, like just behind so many. He's in the PayPal mafia, is what we call it out here. These guys that sort of founded PayPal and then went on to do great things. He just had so much experience building consumer internet companies that I thought, hey, it'd be great to get his advice. Didn't want to raise money from him. Had to raise some money from Len Lodish on the East Coast and his investment partner before moving west. And this guy just like would not meet with me. Just would not meet with me at all. So I'd ping him. You know, my friend worked for him and tried to set up a meeting. Keith would say, you know, sure, we'll meet. I'd respond, great, what time? No response. No response. Hey, Keith, like, really looking forward to meeting soon. Love to pick your brain about what I'm working on. Just wondering, you know, when would be a good time to meet? No response. I'd go up to the city and ping Keith and say, hey, Keith, just want to let you know I'm like up in the city near your offices, like hanging out at the Starbucks. I just had a meeting here. I'm going to be hanging out doing work for the rest of the day. Like, if you want to like come by, like that would be great. I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee. Like, no response. So eventually, like my friend intervenes and is like, Keith, what are you doing? Stop being a jerk. Answer Jack's email. So Keith responds to me with 3 words. Where's your deck? Where's my deck? I don't want to pitch you anything. I'm not trying to raise money from you. I just wanted to, you know, tell you a little bit about what we're working on and get your thoughts. No response. So my friend calls me up and goes, you better make a deck. So I'm here, you know, picture it's like 95 degrees in Palo Alto in this little apartment off of University Avenue, sweating it out, building a deck for this new idea because, you know, this was something new we discovered. It wasn't the original thing we raised money on. And send it over to Keith. Keith goes, all right, great, got it. For the next 2 hours, he ripped it apart, just tore it to shreds. Every like little piece of this business, just one-liners back and forth over email. My favorite was, he'd ask me a question, I responded with an idea of how I'd solve that, and he said, you'd have a better shot playing quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, period. So, you know, put yourself in my shoes. Here you are, like, you moved across the country, left school early to like start a business, and this guy who's like one of the gods of Silicon Valley hates your idea and is ripping it apart over email. But, you know, it was actually really instructive. I was really learning a lot from him. And he had some really valid points about how we were thinking about things in the market and stuff like that. So at the end of this 2-hour just exchange, I kind of sucked in my pride and said, Keith, thank you so much. This has been very helpful. I really appreciate it. I have tremendous respect for you and Max and the PayPal guys. I'd still really love to have the opportunity. I'll think about these things, and I'd still really love to have the opportunity to meet up with you and buy you lunch or coffee. He says, all right, okay, fine, like, let's meet this weekend. I respond, what time? No response. Sunday rolls around. Hey, Keith, gonna be up in the city today. Like, would really love to meet with you and chat with you about this stuff. No response. Finally, I get a meeting with him the next Thursday. And at this point, it actually worked out well because I knew exactly what all of his sort of grievances were with what we were working on and thoughts. So I had prepared. You know, I'd taken my network of smart people that I knew in the tech world and really tried to solve a lot of these problems. Walked into the meeting, had a pretty focused agenda, said, you know, here are the things that I want to cover. Here are the, you know, specific points in your emails that I think are really worth discussing. And he goes, whoa, wait. Let me hear the pitch. So I said, okay. And I pitched him on Milo. We actually didn't have a name for it yet. And within about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, he goes, all right, I want to invest. I said, I don't want your money. I didn't come here to pitch you. I'm not trying to raise money from you. He said, I don't care. You're going to take my money anyway. And I'm going to introduce you to Javed Karim, who's the co-founder of YouTube, and Kevin Hartz. They do investments with me, and you should take their money too because you're going to need it, and don't you want more engineers, and blah, 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 like all this stuff. So I thought, well, I wouldn't mind meeting the co-founder of YouTube. That sounds pretty good. So was introduced to those guys, started getting to know them, and they all liked it, so they all wanted to invest. They do very few deals together. The only other one that they did around us was sort of Airbnb. So they do like one deal a year together through this special fund that's their own money. And so I'm feeling pretty good, get a term sheet from them. Terms are pretty good, but I'm a Wharton student, so I'm going to negotiate the price up. And then literally the stock market just fell out of the sky. Just this week when we got the term sheet, literally the stock market went down over 5% every day, Monday through Friday. So this was like that week. I don't know if you guys remember this, but that week, that was like the worst week in stock market history since like the Great Depression. So interesting time to be raising money, but to these guys' credit, who knows, maybe they lost 25% of their net worth over that period of time, but they still wanted to invest, and I took the money. I actually ran a model to figure out, like, should I take the money, should I not? And my model told me that with the adjusted probabilities of success, I should actually pay them to be involved in the company. So I figured, all right, I'll take their money. And from that point, one of the things I negotiated was, all right, I'll get you guys involved, but what I want in return is I want to meet with each of you every Friday for an hour individually to go over the business, and I want to learn a lot from you. So the one thing I think I realized was, especially after having spent some time here, you do learn a lot at school. It's not that school's not valuable, school's valuable, but there's so much more to learn, especially in any particular industry. And the best way, I think, to learn is to surround yourself with people who have done whatever you want to do and spend some time with them. And that's what I did. So Keith was sort of your all-around, anything related to startups. He was just great examples, a lot of experience with it, strategy, product, hiring, getting users, monetization. He had experience with all these things. Kevin was pretty similar, but was particularly focused on, he's a serial entrepreneur, so a lot of the challenges that you face when you're a serial entrepreneur, how do you build a team, how do you raise money, how do you find really great people, how do you motivate them? And then Javed really spent a lot of time with me on product and technology and users, and how do you understand like the data from users on your site and use that to inform the product decisions you make. So that was a really great sort of learning experience for me. And through that, we learned a lot that made the product a lot better. We learned strategies for getting users. We ended up replicating something that Yelp had done early on, and that enabled us to go from like 0 users to over 1 million a month in about a year, which was pretty good. And then basically before we knew it, we had a lot of retailers knocking on our door that wanted to participate in the platform. The network effect started going where we started with some retailers, we got some more users, attract more retailers, attract more users. To get a lot more users, we thought, well, we can build Milo.com into a pretty big property, or we can plug this data in to like every major shopping site on the web, because every company wants this data and wants to have this experience. So all these companies started coming to us wanting to do deals. We were doing deals with some of them. And of course, a lot of them were also interested in acquiring the company. And I didn't really want to do that yet. We were really on a tear. the number of stores we were adding, the users we were getting, the deals we were closing were pretty phenomenal. We had a lot of sort of interest from bigger investors. In between then, we had done an A round. Also at like the worst time to raise money, there were like in a quarter or two, 3 early stage A round web companies that got funded, and we were one of them. So right now it's crazy, like anyone can raise money. These were different times. And, you know, started sort of exploring a lot of those options, but the team was growing. We'd probably had 15 or 20 people at the team in the team when we started doing this, and hiring was going really well. We were really building a killer team, and you know, really thought about it. What started happening to us, one of the companies that was interested in potentially buying us really started heavily pursuing us competitively and like basically copying a lot of what we did in the service, and that was pretty difficult to deal with. We actually had information that Eric Schmidt, who's the chairman of Google, had sent a letter to their board basically saying that what we were doing was going to be one of the top 3 priorities for Google over the next 5 years, which is pretty scary. I think Google does a lot of here, there. They try a lot of stuff, and usually if they try something in your space, it's not really that big of a deal. When you have to be worried, I think, is when they're super focused from the top down on something. They can actually get it done and do a really good job at it. So that was a little bit scary for us. And then at the same time, you know, some of these companies we were doing deals with started approaching us, and ultimately to sort of realize this bigger vision that we had of bringing all the products and all the shelves of all the stores in the world onto the web, we thought that eBay would be a great partner for that. So ended up selling the business last December, and I am basically running local at eBay now, which has been an interesting experience in addition to running Milo within eBay. And I've been there for, I guess, 10 months now. So that's sort of the background on me and how I got to where I am, and hopefully a little bit of color of how it went along the way. So I'm happy to, so the next thing that I'd love to do is tell you some stories about some other companies that I think would be really interesting to you, but I want to actually stop and take a short break for any questions before diving into that. Any questions, burning questions?
Congratulations, Jack.
Thanks.
Quick question on, you seem to accomplish a lot on that initial $10,000. Can you go back and break that down? I'm sure there were other funding sources that you relied on to get you through the process.
Yeah, so
Can you repeat the question, just so we
That-
can make sure we pick it up?
yes. So the question was, in the early days, we had $10,000 and we got a lot done. How did we get so much done, or were there other funding sources that we were using? We ended up, you know, it's funny, at that point, I was like an undergrad in college. So my personal burn rate was very low. I could eat ramen, and I had an aero bed and slept on the floor with my friends, and that was really fun. So I had like no cost that I had to deal with. It was really just a question of service providers. So what we did with our law firm is we negotiated like a deferral of fees, so that's how we didn't have to pay the law firm at first, in exchange for a small warrant that the law firm got. So legal fees, that's how we handled that. In terms of people that we brought in, it really just depended on the person. Like some people were more motivated by equity, so maybe you can pay them, you know, based on their contribution in some form of equity, or you know, maybe they just want to kind of be involved and they want to check it out. And we had some people who were, for example, interning at that time, who were sort of doing it for a very low cost, close to free. So that's how we got it going when we had like no money, and then the point was to get it to the point where we had enough that we could raise money. And Len Lodish was sort of a mentor of mine while I was in school, so I went to his office and pitched him what we had so far, and he had brought one of his investment partners, and that was during boom times, so that was before all this stuff happened with the macroeconomy, and I walked away with like $450,000 after a few meetings. Now, I didn't like just meet Len, right? I had built a relationship with him probably over a year and a half or 2 years and had known him for a really long time. And that's actually what ends up happening when you raise money. You really want to build a relationship beforehand. It's very hard to like raise money from someone you just met. You can do it, and Silicon Valley's a lot like that, but in the East Coast that was hard. So that's sort of, we used the 10 grand to get us to the point where we could raise something a little bit more substantial to go bigger.
So tell us about getting your first customer.
Getting the first customer. So the interesting thing about our business, and a lot of great businesses have this problem, is you have a chicken and an egg problem. So you need something to get something. So eBay is a good example. You need inventory to attract buyers, and then you need buyers to attract more inventory. Milo is kind of similar, right? Like you needed stores to list their inventory to get buyers, you needed buyers to get the inventory. So the way we started it was similar to how Kayak started, which was we just built, very complex sort of deep web crawlers that index the data from the retailers. And we observed all of their like robots.txt and all of this stuff. But that was what we used to sort of get going and get somewhat of a critical mass that could start attracting the buyers. And then eventually we got to the point actually where a lot of people had discovered us and started coming to us. So I guess we just struck a need that was so good that we didn't have to do a lot of like heavy business development and sales in the early days. Now we do. We have a pretty big business team of, kind of probably 7 really good business development people, which obviously grew over time. But for us, we just kind of struck such a good need on both sides of the equation that we solved the chicken and the egg problem initially, and then we're able to get it to snowball from there. Yes?
What are some of the major problems that, looking back, could have been so severe that could have sunk you? That now, you're more experienced, and if you were to do it over again, you would not have committed those mistakes or new mistakes.
At one point, I almost hired a guy that I probably shouldn't have hired. And that might seem ridiculous, like hiring someone can sink a company. In the early days, if you hire the wrong people into your company, it can like really change the trajectory of the company. It can change the culture. It can change so many things. At the time, we were sort of working around the clock, really trying to work on the product, and this person was very much a like 10 to 5. He was pretty good, but I think that might have changed our culture and might have caused a lot of problems. So we were very, very careful about hiring people, and it's unclear if we had chosen to hire him, if that would have shifted our trajectory because it was so early or not. Other things, we had some pretty bad stuff happen to us when we were raising money, but we managed to just go through it all. So the normal thing that you'd say in response to this question is, oh, the sky starts falling, and the sky actually did start falling, and we were still okay. I think the biggest thing is just persistence and having the tenacity to get through it. And I don't know what other stuff sort of could have come up. A competitor could have emerged out of left field. For some reason, the retailers might have said, we actually don't like what you're doing. Retailers love what we were doing because we're driving more business for them. So I don't know. I'd say I thought a lot about the team early on. I think you can make some mistakes with your team that can cause a lot of problems.
Jeff, I'm going to start as well with my 2 partners here. We're just wondering, if your role at Milo at the beginning, how much of testing did you do in order to gauge demand versus just jumping in and just investing 6 months into filing something and then just further going on versus just gauge demand, putting up an A/B site?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I'll get into that actually in the second part of the talk, and then if I don't answer it fully, can come back to it, but it's a really important question.
So how did you hire the first people that were outside
We surrounded ourselves with people who did. That's, as you can tell, sort of a theme, like especially when you don't have a lot of sort of credibility because you're just starting a business and you're young. Like you want to surround yourself with other people who have done it before and have those networks and can help connect you with the right people, either getting them involved as advisors or as mentors or as investors is a really smart idea. One of the people that we got involved with as an advisor is this guy named Aditya Agarwal, who was one of the early guys at Facebook. He's such a great engineer and tech guy. He went into Facebook. This is a story about him. Went into Facebook, put on his headphones, and everyone at Facebook was like, "Who is this guy? Like, he's not even saying hi." Like, he just like puts on his headphones, goes for the computer, and just every day, from like morning until the time he went to sleep, was coding, just going. And then about 2 weeks later, he like popped up and said, "Oh, I'm done. I wrote our search engine." So, just one of those guys, like really smart guy. Ended up getting involved in the news feed and writing their like messaging service and all sorts of stuff. But as a result of him being in Facebook, he had a great network for us and a lot of tips on that. So different open source projects that really good engineers work on, or someone he had met that he thinks would be really good and he'd introduce us to them. And then also he helped us set up programming challenges that for engineers would let us like assess how good an engineer is. It's really difficult just based on a resume to figure out how good someone is and how good their code is and how fast they can work. So these challenges, Facebook used them very successfully, so we sort of used that method and that proved to be very good.
Going back to that chicken and egg question, you said you solved it by doing like scraping, or pulling together a bunch of information effectively for free. How did you get that first customer to pay for something that you were effectively giving to other guys for free at that point?
So we definitely didn't think of it as scraping. I mean, these were pretty like sophisticated crawlers we built, and we were indexing the data. But I mean, every business needs a way to sort of get started, and every business is different. And usually, there are some exceptions. There are some businesses where you just like start making money from day one, and that's the path you continue taking. And like lead generation is a good example of a business like that, where you're selling leads to some online education like site or company. Basically, for the business to work, you have to start making money from day one. Most businesses, especially big businesses with big ideas, it doesn't work like that. You need to start somewhere, and you need to kind of have a strategy to get to where you need to be. In our case, we needed to have users before anyone's going to pay us, because what are they going to pay us for? Like, they're not going to sit and talk with us and do all this stuff.
I understand why
Yeah.
you did that, but how did you turn the switch and all of a sudden say to this next guy, okay, now you have to pay, whereas these other guys?
It's a pretty natural conversation. I mean, after a while, and you start talking to them, they assume that you want to be compensated for the revenue and sort of the sales you're driving them. In our case, in the early days, there were some really easy things we could plug into that they already did. So they were already paying other companies per click when someone went from their website, from the publisher's website to their website. They're already paying CPAs, so a commission on the sale, when someone bought on their website, and a lot of them had buy online, pick up in store. So those are things that were easy that we could plug into immediately. And then in terms of the bigger sort of monetization and really charging them even for the offline portion, that's something we've been acquired, and we're still working on the measurement of that and really figuring that out for the retailer. And we've made a lot of progress, and we're going to be able to do it. But that was enough of sort of a revenue stream in the beginning to get going. So I'm actually going to continue, if it's okay, just with the rest, and then open up for questions again toward the end. So I thought it'd be useful. So I said it in the beginning, sort of your idea really barely matters, and getting started does. So addresses your question. I think as an entrepreneur, if you want to start a company, you need to graduate to this stage where it's not about your idea, it's really about betting on yourself and just your ability to ultimately be successful in what you're doing. And I think that if you bet on yourself and you never give up, you have a 100% probability of success. You hear that a lot from sort of people in the Valley, and it's very, very true. So let me give you some examples. Who's heard of a company called PayPal? So when PayPal started out, PayPal was initially a mobile encryption company. So Max Levchin had seen this need where it's really hard to encrypt stuff over phones. He wrote this encryption software. They'd raised money on it. This was dot-com boom days. He had just graduated from University of Illinois and was kind of going around the Valley, and that just was not working at all. It was not clear that that was a big market or a great idea. So they started pivoting, and they thought, well, what if we can get closer to the money somehow? What about this idea of beaming money between Palm Pilots? So they created this software to try to beam money between Palm Pilots, and they actually famously, Max had realized, I kind of need a CEO to run this. He contacted Peter Thiel, who was one of his early sort of angel investors, to be the CEO. And Peter was helping with this. And man, this just really isn't working, this beaming money between Palm Pilots. We need a big marketing stunt. We need a big marketing stunt to make this happen. So they got the guy from Star Trek up on a stage, tried to invite media from everywhere, and have Spock, I think it was Spock, the real Spock, beam money to someone, beam $1 million to someone. That was sort of what was going on. And no media showed up to this event. And they wasted $1 million. $1 million just for some marketing stunt. So, you tried this encryption thing, that didn't work. You tried this Palm Pilot thing, that's not working at all. A lot of people would just give up and be like, oh man, maybe I should just get a job at, I don't know where you'd go then, Excite or something. But they didn't. They kept at it, and they thought, well, maybe there's a way to do this online. Maybe we can do it through email. So they started making it about sending money through email, and that sort of worked, but not really. And then all of a sudden they noticed people on eBay were using it. It's really hard to pay people on eBay in the early days. So that was a use case where they said, okay, great, huge pain point, big need here. They focused all their energy on just invading eBay and making sure PayPal was used for all eBay transactions. And that was it. That's honestly what made the company. They grew on eBay's back. They sort of figured a clever way to get eBay's user base. And that was really what launched PayPal into what it became. But they could have quit at any point along the way. They also had, there are so many things I'm leaving out of this story. They had a competitor, X.com, who was started by a Wharton guy, Elon Musk, who actually had an office across the street from them. We actually had PayPal's first office, so it's funny. You can see the window directly across the street, this other company competing with you, looking back at you. It's pretty funny. And they were copying each other, and there was a merger that was a disaster in the middle, and Mike Moritz joined the board and started shaking things up, and they had to switch their code base from something that was Unix-based to Windows, and it scaled only 1% as well, and all the engineers were quitting, and they had the Russian mob had figured out how to use PayPal to suck $10 million a month out of the company. So $10 million just being sucked out of the company every month. A lot of lesser people just would have quit and just been like, what the heck is this? The Russian mob's coming after us. We have this crazy guy across the street staring at me all the time. Crazy mergers, the VC's on my case. We're so diluted at this point. We're going to just, not do it. But they were a big success. Google sort of started as a search for your business company. So they created this website for Stanford initially, where they indexed all the stuff on stanford.edu and built a better search engine for Stanford. And Google thought, well, this is great. Like, maybe we can just do this for businesses. Businesses will probably need search on their websites. So we've built this technology. We can set up a search engine for them on their websites, and that'll be great. That's what they raised money on. Everyone was like banking on them doing that. They had a board meeting at one point where Larry and Sergey really wanted to take it to the consumer level. Their VCs were screaming at them about, you're never going to do that. Like, there's so many entrenched players. Like, you're the 7th search engine. There's no way people are going to use this. You need to focus on making money in the business. Mike Moritz like stood up at one meeting and slammed shit on the table and was saying, I don't know, like, I'm out of the company. And Ram Shriram tried to buy his shares and like just all this behind the scenes stuff. And then there was stuff over Larry and Sergey. Could they be CEO? And they didn't. So like a lot of sort of turbulence in founding the business. Ultimately, they ended up doing it the consumer way, and that worked out. But that wasn't the initial plan, and there were a lot of people pushing against them to get there. Another example is Slide. How many people have heard of Slide? Some, probably not all. Slide ended up building all these Facebook applications and sort of games and widgets and things like that. Slide started as a slideshow for your MySpace. So MySpace didn't have pictures for a long time, and Max saw this and said, like, hey, what if we create this widget where you can upload your photos to Slide, you can embed it on your MySpace profile, and then people can see it. Everyone ended up seeing it on other people's MySpace profiles. They started using it. It got like crazy traction. So many people were sort of viewing these photos, and ultimately they made no money off of that. And like MySpace wouldn't let them monetize it. They tried to kick them off the platform a bunch of times. They ended up migrating into Facebook. They got out of the photo sharing business. They got into sort of these interactions and some like sort of lightweight games. A lot of sort of, it's not linear, their path to success. YouTube is another example. So YouTube, and I obviously know this pretty well from talking a lot with Javed about the early days. They literally started the site as a video dating site. So the idea was, oh man, like, why do you have to go on dates with people? Like, going to restaurants and like, or the first date. Like, how do you find people, and do you really need to go have coffee, or like, what if you could just do it on the web? That seems to make sense. Less of a commitment, no cost, blah blah blah. So anyway, so they tried this idea of video dating, and they built this great site, and no one was using it. Like, apparently they're a great idea, like no one was using this site. They tried invading Craigslist and like pulling people off of Craigslist. They tried gift cards, they tried this, they tried that, like all these things. No one was using this. Like, it was like 2 months in, they launched the product, and they were up to 500 users for that month. 500, and they were actually feeling pretty good about that, because it's actually hard to get 500 users, believe it or not. But what they started noticing was, oh man, like nobody's doing this video dating thing, but people keep uploading funny clips from Saturday Night Live, like, and people are watching that stuff. Maybe there's something there. So they sort of started pivoting the product to be more about that, uploading something in asynchronous communication, and eventually people just started uploading a lot of videos. They figured out that just like Max had exploited MySpace with the widget of your photos, you could embed a YouTube video in MySpace. So everyone was putting these things on their profiles, and it just spread and took off overnight. So looked like an overnight success, but like very close to failure. They thought about shutting the business down at certain points. They couldn't raise money for that because nobody wanted to fund that. Like, not to mention the lawsuits that came in after and just all this stuff. So YouTube's another example of where the idea barely mattered and getting started did. Another one is Airbnb. Who's heard of Airbnb recently? So Airbnb is an interesting company. You can rent out your space. So if you like own an apartment and you have an extra bedroom, you can list it and people can stay there instead of staying at a hotel. Airbnb, let's see. really started on this observation of like, these guys were trying to figure out how to get going in entrepreneurship. So they're going to all these conferences, like entrepreneurship conferences. And they kept going to conferences, and there were like no hotel rooms available because conferences suck up all the availability from all the hotels. So they actually started selling aerobeds effectively for conferences. This was the initial idea. Aerobeds for conferences, where you could like crash at some place on an aerobed because there were no hotels available. That was their market. That was like what they were addressing, you know, overbooked conferences with aerobeds. Airbnb, that's kind of how you, a little bit of related to the name. They also, you know, they figured when Obama was inaugurated, that would be another one that would like overbook hotels. They tried to do it in DC, and they literally had no funding. So what they did was they created these cereal boxes of Captain McCain's and like Obama O's. So literally a cereal box with these presidential candidates on it, and like different types of cereal in it, and they sold it to people in DC. And that's how they got their like seed money. I'm not even joking. That's what kept the business alive. Just totally not related to their business. And then, you know, they started sort of realizing, well, what about, you don't need to stay on an aerobed, you could stay on a couch, and maybe you could stay in a bed, and maybe you could have a whole room, maybe you could even have a whole place to yourself, and it kind of got bigger and bigger, and it's a huge company now, it's doing really well. Groupon is another example. Who's heard of Groupon? Okay. Guess what Groupon started as? It started as this site called The Point. It was about like rallying people around your political ideas. Just not related to group buying at all. So you go there, and I actually haven't used that site, but the Point site, but it was supposed to be like you create these issues and try to get people to back them and get a lot of momentum behind you so that, I don't know, it's a terrible idea. Like nobody was really using this site, and it's not really a big market intuitively. But what they did notice was some people on the site were forming groups to do group buying. So, hey, like people in Chicago, Illinois, you know that salon that's really good, and yeah, that woman there is really good. What if like 20 of us got together and maybe she'd give us a discount? They started just seeing this behavior develop on the site, and they thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then they started thinking about, well, what if we were sort of the advocate for the consumer and we promised merchants a lot of business? Maybe they'd drop the price for everyone, and we could create this model of what became Groupon and send them emails about it. Sort of wildly successful there. You know, some people have, I know it's in the news a lot for not being such a great business, but other people who know the numbers have said it's the fastest growing business like ever in Silicon Valley. So it started as this site called The Point about sort of debating political views. Living Social started as, I don't know, it was some app on Facebook that you would use where you're supposed to like get together with your friends and do social stuff. They obviously copied the Groupon model to go after them. And even some Wharton startups. So let me tell you about some Wharton startups where this happened. So Zynga. Who knows Zynga? So Mark Pincus started that. He's a Wharton alum. And there was one other guy from Wharton there in there too. Sorry?
AT Trader.
Yeah, AJ Trader? AT Trader? That's right. So when they started off, they just started going after poker. They thought like, oh, poker's gonna make sense on Facebook. Like you're sort of trading money, you're gambling on Facebook. You know, there's gotta be some way to sort of build that into a business and make money off of it. And people started playing the poker thing, but they really never made money off of that at all. To this day, they make a little bit of money off of it, but it's like a tiny, tiny, tiny part of the business. It turned out that these things like Farmville, where you come back and invest a lot of time and there's sort of in-app purchasing of virtual goods. This was the model that worked. Guess what? He didn't build Farmville. He bought it. He started buying these companies. He, you know, had some capital because he had raised money from VCs and ended up buying that company and bought a lot of the other ones that became really big successes for Zynga. And eventually they got it, and they have studios now that sort of churn these things out. But the initial thing of like poker on Facebook, not a big business, like not the best thing to bet on. And he's started a lot of companies, so you can see how sort of hard this is. StubHub, Jeff Fleur won't tell you this, but it started as this company called Liquid Tickets. So he approached this as any good finance guy would, which is let's look at verticals where people are buying stuff, let's find the highest margin thing, and just try to build a business there. So that's literally how he did it, because he's from Blackstone and very finance heavy guy. Tickets, turns out, are very high margin. So he tried to create this business where he noticed there were a lot of seats that were going unfilled in stadiums, and he tried to sort of partner with the stadiums to sell that inventory day of. And that was like a really hard thing to do. Like nobody wanted to partner with them, nobody really wanted to buy it or sell it. There were all these legal complications. He went on doing that for like 2 years, and it just didn't work. And then he sort of evolved it and noticed there was a need for people to directly trade tickets over the web, and founded StubHub, and that did really well. And now it's a big part of eBay, actually. Talked to you about Invite Media, those guys I was talking about in the early days who did like the video ad startup and then the social targeting startup. They ended up building this thing totally different in the display ad space that revolutionized display advertising, and Google ended up buying them. Shopzilla started as this thing where you could rate online e-commerce sites and give reviews on them. It wasn't about comparison shopping or buying products. It was really hard. It got to the point where Farhad at one point, like everyone had quit on him, and he ran out of money. And it was one guy, it was him, like in an apartment working on this by himself, like wishing there was a job, as he says, some Caterpillar job at the company Caterpillar that he could just take. And eventually he found, well, actually in the comparison shopping model, that's a really big space, and sort of pivoted into that, and it became a big business. I think it was sold for, I don't know, $700 million or something. And even for Milo. So you've heard the story from Milo too, of how we sort of started with something that was totally different and had a bunch of ideas. There were some that I even left out in there that we tried that really didn't work. So the point is, just freaking do it. Like, what are you waiting for? If you just wait and you overanalyze your idea, you're never going to have the opportunity to discover these big things in the market. It's just not how it works. Like, it's very, very rare that someone just intuits by themselves in some room alone this amazing idea that's going to change the world. You'll probably intuit something that's pretty close, like in the right area, in the right market. There is a need, for example, to exchange tickets online. That makes a lot of sense. There's inefficiencies in that market. But the initial solution was like totally wrong. So the point is to just get going. Just start it. Like, if you don't start it now, you're probably never going to start it. You're going to end up having a job, and then you're going to end up, making some money, and that's not a bad thing, but the problem with it is you're going to get comfortable, and you're not going to be able to sleep on a narrow bed and have ramen. You're going to have, a serious girlfriend who, wants to go on vacations and all of these things. All of a sudden, life starts getting a little bit more expensive, and it becomes harder to take these risks, I think. So, it's better to, there are clearly people who can because they've saved. That's another approach that people have taken, but sort of the sooner you start, the less you need, the more you can really throw yourself into it. So you really do have an advantage of just going for it. So why is it that why does this phenomenon exist where so many big successful companies in Silicon Valley and around the world started with something else? The first thing is, like I said, I think it's very hard to just intuit this masterful product and come up with the exact version of it on day one. Some other ones I left out there, by the way, like Twitter started as an SMS thing between people. Like there wasn't a site, twitter.com. It wasn't about sharing news and photos and links and none of that. Yelp actually started as an email thing where you try to send out an email to your friends and get recommendations for local like places. That didn't work. So just so many, I could go on and on and on and on about all of these companies. It's really hard, even if you're really, really, really smart, to just come up with a brilliant idea on day one. So the best thing to do is surround yourself with people who you can learn from, who can be your mentors, because believe it or not, like everyone still has a lot to learn. Like there's so much to learn. And surrounding yourself with those people and getting them on your side, either as an investor, or as an advisor, or a mentor, can be really helpful to you. You can learn a lot from them. And then what ends up happening is you put yourself in this space and you learn about sort of adjacent opportunities. So Josh Koppelman, who's also a Wharton alum, calls it a heat-seeking missile. Like the best entrepreneurs are heat-seeking missiles. And that's another sort of way to think about it. The one thing that I would say when you are considering that is sort of important is the market you pick to go into. So you either want to go somewhere where you can have massive, massive amount of users that are really engaged, or in a market where there are lots of transactions taking place. There are some things you can build that like aren't in either of those camps, and those are the ones that are really hard to build into businesses. But as long as you start off in one of those two areas, and you're flexible and you surround yourself with really smart people, and you really get to know the market pretty well, and you never give up, you're gonna be successful. It's just sort of the way it works. So hopefully this is helpful, sharing my story and some of the stories from these companies. Happy to turn it around for questions.
Jack,
Yes.
I'm a big believer in the pivot and how important that is, and that was a lot of great examples there, but I'm interested in hearing a little more detail about how you guys did your pivot and arrived at what became Milo, the real idea.
Yeah.
How did that, the metrics, and was there a process, informal or formal? How did you do it?
So I'll walk you through my process. Step one for me was, man, comparison shopping sites like Shopzilla are making a lot of money and their sites suck. And it's a messed up market for a lot of reasons that I could go into for a very long time. But there's a need for there to be good shopping sites on the internet because people buy a lot of stuff and you can build really big businesses there. That was it. That was the beginning. Like, there's, Amazon and eBay are great. They truly are really amazing businesses. But I had a hard time believing that was it, So that's where I started, honestly. And then at the time, I think one way to think about businesses is like really good businesses. What's possible today that wasn't possible 3 years ago, and what's changed? So clearly, one of the things that was changing was mobile. A lot of people were getting these smarter phones and starting to use them, and you had cameras in phones. You'd never had that before. People were using them for not just phone calls, for starting to browse the web, and it seemed like apps were pretty obvious to be next. So that was an area where I spent a lot of time thinking early on. Another thing was so that was the initial idea we had, and then just giving you an idea of sort of the next approach we took as we thought, all right, it's really hard to get people to download stuff. One of the things we learned in marketing class was the hardest thing you can do is change consumer behavior. So figure out a way to get in front of the consumer in some normal process they were already going through. So people at the time weren't in the process of downloading apps on smartphones. People didn't do it. They do it now, they didn't do it then. So we thought, well, what do people normally do when they shop? They go to Google, or they go to Amazon, or they go to eBay, or they go to Shopzilla, or they go to all these other sites, CNET. So my next thought was, is there a way we could be there? Like, could we be there because they're already there? And then I thought, okay, how can we get there? Well, one way is we can do business development. Well, that's not going to work because nobody's going to want to do business with us because we have nothing. So why would they? Then I thought, well, is there another way to do it? Maybe you could create something in the browser that would detect when they went to sites like Google and search for products, or Amazon, or CNET. And maybe you could create technology that would just overlay the information in the page without their sort of permission. And that way you could do it across all the sites people were going to and didn't have to change their behavior. So we started building that, and that's what we raised our money on initially, this sort of concept. But we ended up finding that people really don't like downloading that. They were afraid of spyware because there were all these old things that didn't try to build a good product and screwed users and popped up ads at them everywhere. And people were really wary of downloading anything having to do with online shopping on their computer and installing it. So then we thought about, okay, if that's the problem, getting users, how can we change that? How can we start getting users? So I thought, well, maybe there's a way, if people aren't like just downloading this outright, we can either pay, that's one option. You can get it installed with other stuff, and then if we make more money, then we're paying to acquire users. You have a business. Turns out you have to pay a lot to be able to do that per user. And then you have this bad incentive where you've paid a lot of money, so you really want to monetize, so you create a bad user experience where you have to pop up the ads at people to make your investment back. So I thought, okay, well, the best way to get users for free is to create something viral. And what are some viral things that we could build into this that would make it spread on its own? At the time, Facebook was huge. Everyone was using Facebook. So I thought, okay, what if we broaden this, and shopping's the way we monetize, and that's the really interesting part from a business standpoint, but what if we made it somehow like tied to Facebook so we could get it viral? And the one thing that was missing from Facebook was instant messaging. So this was before Facebook chat. So you can tell where the story's going. I thought, this is great. We're in the browser. We can like create this cool instant messaging widget in Facebook. Everyone's going to use that. Nobody likes like AIM and all these other services. We can mine all of their friends' contact info from their friends' profile pages, build them a chat client, and then that would be so cool. Everyone would use that. And then after every IM is sent to someone on another network, we'll advertise the chat and the sort of plugin that you could use. And people will come and download it because it's going to be really cool. Turns out I was right. Like, Facebook chat needed to exist, and like synchronous communication on Facebook made a ton of sense. But Facebook built it like right when we were almost done with launching the product. Like literally when we were almost done. I actually had this painful experience of meeting the engineer that built it for lunch, like the day before it was going to launch, because I had some friends at Facebook and had caught wind of this. Turns out, great idea, like tons of people use it, might have worked, might have been viral. We might have gotten 30, 40, 50 million people like downloading and using this, but our window had closed. So then it was like, all right, well, how else can we get users that are free, and how do we get them fast? And that's where, when I really started learning from Keith, Kevin, and Javed about other things that had worked. And Yelp had the same problem. How do you get people to start using Yelp? And they had found that on Google, there's a huge gap in Google's index for location plus restaurant, that keyword. But a lot of people were searching for it. So they just started creating pages that were created to rank for those terms. So again, no change in consumer behavior. They found it through Google. They found it after finding it a few times. They'd come actually directly to Yelp to use the service. So what about location plus product? Maybe that'll work. Like people probably search for that. Some people. A lot of people probably don't because the results are so bad. But we started creating pages optimized for those keywords, and we got pretty good at it. And that's how we got our initial sort of set of traffic. And once you start getting all of those users and things are really growing, then you can keep going. It makes no more sense to try to change the idea. But the goal is ultimately, at least in consumer web, to get scale. Like, you need to get a lot of people using it, and you basically need to keep trying things until you find a way that works to do that. So hopefully that's helpful, thinking through the thought process.
When you talk about the future of local shopping at PayPal, where do you think all this is going in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple. Like, people are going to expect to have access to information of anything that exists anywhere in the real world at a moment's notice from their phone. So the big thing that we're focusing on that's still a big pain point, we've made a lot of progress, but we still have a lot more to make, is what's available where and for what price and who has the best price. Because that'll influence where I go, the time I spend, the direction I take, and how much money I spend. So we're focusing on that. We're focusing on being able to measure that. So when someone does a search on mobile or the web and goes into the store, being able to kind of measure that seamlessly and give people rewards for using the service is going to be really big. You see a lot of interesting innovations in payments in local too, and you'll start seeing some stuff from PayPal too that we're working on. But I probably can't comment on too much of that. But it's an exciting time. I think, Mark Andreessen wrote this article called "Software is Eating the World," and I think it's true. Just every sort of industry and segment of the economy is just going to be influenced by the web and technology, and it's happening now for local really fast.
So in your story, I didn't hear much of a struggle with finding the right technology partners. We actually have a startup, and we have an app on the App Store, and we're struggling with finding the right technology partners. Did you have issues as well?
It's really hard to find the right technology partners. It helps if the more technical you are, the easier it is. It's sort of hard to, the thing you have to, like, engineers, especially good engineers, have a lot of options of things they could do and spend their time on, and they could create their own stuff. They could create their own company. So why are they going to work with you? And a lot of people, I think, at Wharton, unfortunately, sort of treat, I'm not saying that you're doing this at all, but treat engineers as code monkeys. Hey, I had this great idea. I worked at some consulting firm, and that makes me like really smart, and you need to do my idea and like sit in the basement, and I'll give you pizza, and like I'm gonna give you like no stock in this and low pay, and just it doesn't work like that. Like, you need to find someone, you need to sell them on the vision, on what you can provide. So that could be business development, it could be product, it could be recruiting, it could be investors. You really need to convince them that you're a good partner. You're going to put in a lot of work too, and you need to give them like meaningful equity, because they're not code monkeys. Like, they can make and break the company. And in terms of finding them, so that first step, you just need to try everything. Like, honestly. And the thing is, it's just like raising money. You should have the goal of building a relationship instead of like selling them on joining your company the first time you meet them. It's really hard. These people, they probably are working somewhere else. They have another job. They have like their own life. So they're not going to just jump from that to your idea because you just kind of showed up. So the best way to do it is to meet with them and get to know them. And like for John, my co-founder, I worked on him for probably 6 months before he initially joined. I mean, he's a really good guy, and he was working on his own startup at the time, but I was just persistent and kept up with him. So you just need to do that, and you need to start taking people out to lunch and coffees, and if you know anyone who knows, just exhaust all channels, basically. It's really hard, obviously, because everyone's looking for great technology people. The other thing I'd say is, I know a lot of people at Wharton are afraid of this, but coding is not that hard. It's really not that hard. Like, we're logical people. It's just logic. Like, it's not that hard. You can learn it. And the advantage of learning it is you'll have a lot more control over your product, and you'll get more respect from the engineers, which will be great. So it's a great, I mean, software is eating the world. Like, knowing how to program is going to be really important, and it's just not that hard. Like, you can get a like if you put yourself in a room for a week and you like Googled like great sites to learn to program or search on Quora, and you use them for a week, like at the end of the week, you could get something done in like a month. You'd be pretty good. So imagine if you had done that a month ago, like you'd be in a pretty good place. No one wants to do this. Everyone hates this advice, but learning to program is not a bad thing. And it'll give you a unique skill set, because it's really hard to find people who are good at business who also understand technology and can program.
Well, we promised people that we'll get you out at 9, and we're actually a little bit past that, so apologies for that. But Jack, thank you very much for coming and sharing these stories. Fantastic.